I've been passing the time discovering my philosophical perspective. I've been neglecting the school of thought for some time. I haven't seriously studied philosophy since 2022. Developing in the subject could be a great way to develop my faith while still having the ability to speak on aspects of thought that are outside of the realm of Christianity. Yeah, it's always been sort of a hobby for me, so I wrote this thing about contemporary philosophy. Contemporary philosophy, spanning from the late 19th century to the present day, is a rich and multifaceted field that reflects the complexities and challenges of modern life. Unlike previous philosophical eras, contemporary philosophy is characterized by its pluralism and diversity, with multiple movements and schools of thought coexisting and interacting. These movements address a wide range of issues, from the nature of reality and human conflict, existence to ethics, politics, and technology. As the world evolved, so too has philosophy, leading to the emergence of new ideas and approaches that seek to make sense of the rapidly changing social, cultural, and technological landscape. This is a big thing for me. I think about this stuff all the time, how our society is consistently changing, our culture, what is it, you know what I mean? And how does all this technology affect it, I often think of the new ideas and the emerging changes that's going to happen to our society, like once augmented reality becomes ubiquitous, like cell phones, it's going to be quite amazing, and I oftentimes fall into a dreamlike state, sort of picturing myself 20 years in the future, and what my place or role could be in it, like it's a very strange time that we live in, and the first 20 years of this new century has been very challenging and tumultuous. I had a lot of hope and optimism when 2020 came around. The virus is pretty bad, but then when the war started in Ukraine, I started to lose a lot of faith. I started to question, like why is this society of intelligent and technologically advanced people still want to combat each other, still start conflicts, and it kind of blows my mind, you know what I mean? Like, it makes me question what the mind of the masses is sort of like centered around, As we navigate the digital age, philosophers have turned their attention to the profound impact of technology on human life, society, and knowledge. Digital and networked philosophy examines how the internet, social media, and other digital technologies reshape our understanding of reality, identity, and community. This movement addresses critical issues such as the nature of digital identity, the ethics of artificial intelligence, and the effects of digital networks on human behavior and social structures. It's like, what is our social structure now? It's, at least in America or in the free world, it seems like very chaotic and dysfunctional, the lack of collaboration, and just the fact that it doesn't yield much fruit anymore, it just seems like this country is just sort of falling into like a spat toll, dysfunctionality, I mean, there's no real like defining aspect of the past 2 decades, except the change in technology and the way we communicate with each other. It just seems like people are generally more self-absorbed, and and gatherings seem superficial and just almost not genuine. That's just how I'm perceiving it. So this is why I think about it a lot. Jean-François Lyotard is a key figure in postmodern philosophy, known for his work, The Postmodern Conditions. I haven't read it yet. I might read it one of these days. Where he famously declared the end of grand narratives and the rise of a more fragmented, pluralistic approach to knowledge. Yeah, I would say that's pretty cemented in our society, a pluralistic approach to knowledge. Michael Foucault, a really interesting guy, explored how power operates through discourse and knowledge, particularly in his studies of institutions like prisons, hospitals, and schools. Yeah, he's a very hardcore guy. I definitely recommend reading his books. Jacques Derrida developed the concept of deconstruction, which examines the internal contradictions and assumptions in texts and ideas, challenging the stability of meaning. Yeah, so he's a pretty sophisticated guy. I haven't read too much of his works, but deconstruction is basically, it's sort of questioning the foundation of the structure of our language, and how people kind of interpret it. It's sort of like when someone explains something to you and you just sort of shake your head like, but you don't really understand what it means, And, he kind of questions that, and he sort of like justifies it, because what is it? What does it actually mean? Like language, I haven't read too much into that, but check it out. These movements, each emerging from rich and diverse traditions of contemporary philosophy, reflect the ongoing evolution of thought as philosophers continue to navigate the complexities of the modern world. Each movement contributes unique insight and challenges to our understanding of reality, ethics, and the human condition, highlighting the dynamic and ever-evolving nature of contemporary philosophy. And that's contemporary philosophy is the current age that we're in philosophy. There's different ages to it, and this is where we're at right now. Critical theory, developed by the Frankfurt School, critiques society, culture, and pervasive structures of power that shape our lives. The movement emerged in response to the failures of traditional Marxism, the account for the cultural and ideological dimensions of social control, particularly under modern capitalism. Yeah, this is pretty sophisticated, and it's kind of controversial too. I haven't gotten too much into it, but I'm going to look into critical theory just a little bit more. I have watched some videos about it and done a little bit of research back in the day, but that's probably something I'll probably get into in the future. Theodor Adorno and Max Horkheimer are foundational figures in critical theory, particularly known for their work in Dialect of Enlightenment, which critiques the way in which Enlightenment rationality has been co-opted to serve oppressive societal structures. Jürgen Hornbass, another significant figure, expanded on this tradition by developing the concept of communicative action and public sphere, emphasizing the role of dialogue and consensus in achieving social justice and democratic governance. Post-structuralism emerged as a critique of structuralism in the 1960s through 1980s, challenging the idea that underlying structures determine human culture and behavior. Post-structuralist thinkers argue that meanings are not fixed but are instead fluid and contingent, shaped by power dynamics in historical context. So yeah, structuralism, that's I haven't studied that much, but I sort of kind of grasp this to a certain extent. It's basically shaped by power dynamics, what influences us, propaganda, historical context. That sort of is what challenges structuralism. Michael Foucault is an influential post-structuralist thinker, particularly through his analysis of how power operates through knowledge and discourse. In works like Discipline and Punish and History of Sexuality, Jacques Derrida, another key figure, developed the concept of deconstruction, which seeks to expose the inherent instability in meaning in language and text, challenging traditional notions and fixed binary oppositions. I mention this again because before, like, it was sort of like an introduction. It was kind of vague, but it's instability in meaning and language, and it just sort of shows that language isn't black and white, and it's worth reading up on. It's just sort of part of contemporary philosophy. Structuralism is a movement that emerged from 1950 to the 1960s. It's the work of Ferdinand de Saussure, who emphasized the rational nature of linguistic science. Structuralism posits the element of understood terms of their relationship to a broader underlying structure rather than in isolation. Claude Lévi-Strauss applied structuralist principles to anthropology, exploring how myths, kinship systems, and cultural practices reflect underlying structures of human thought. Yeah, so that's kind of interesting, it's just sort of like those things like the Mothman in West Virginia and just Bigfoot and all these like myths and kinship systems, like how it sort of structures human thought. It's sort of like one of those things that rests in the back of your mind. Roland Barthes extended structuralism to literary and cultural criticism, and now analyzing how cultural products convey meaning through systems of signs and symbols. That's pretty interesting when trying to communicate to someone, especially if they don't know your language and stuff. Existentialism, originating in the mid-20th century, focuses on individual freedom, choice, and the search for meaning in an indifferent and absurd world. This is something you probably want to touch base on if you want to start with philosophy. Start with existentialism, and sort of work your way up from there, It emerged as a response to the alienation and disillusionment of the 20th century, particularly in the aftermath of World War II. Yep. Jean-Paul Sartre is perhaps the most famous existentialist, known for his assertion that existence precedes essence, meaning that individuals must create their own meaning and purpose in a world without inherent values. I disagree with that. It's because I'm a Christian, I'm a creationist. I'm not sure if he's a nihilist or what, but your job isn't to create your own meaning or purpose, and this world does have inherent values. I believe that. But I'll touch base on that later. Simone de Beauvoir, also a key existentialist, explored the nature of freedom and oppression, particularly in relation to gender, in her seminal work, The Second Sex. There's a lot of gender stuff in philosophy too, Albert Camus contributed to existentialism with the concept of the absurd, highlighting the conflict between humans' search for meaning and the indifferent universe. That's probably a good thing to look for. Like in my case, Albert Camus. I might look into his stuff. And this is a cool one. Phenomenology, founded by Edward Husserl in the early 20th century, is a philosophical movement that seeks to explore and describe the structures of experience and consciousness. Phenomenology emphasizes the direct, lived experience as the primary source of knowledge, challenging the Cartesian separation of mind and body. So, that gets pretty deep. I have studied that type of philosophy before, but the way I would probably explain it's pretty vague right now, but it's interesting. Martin Heidegger, a key figure in phenomenology, expanded Husserl's idea by exploring the nature of being in his work, Being and Time. Heidegger's focus on the question of being and human existence laid the groundwork for existentialism and influenced a wide range of subsequent philosophical movements. So that's just sort of like it just explores the nature of just being and existing. I exist here. You know, it's just such an interesting and cool thing. I exist. I'm here. And that's sort of what it's about. And a lot of people try to put a value on it. Being and existing. Some people think it should just be a free thing. Oh, I'm here and no one should question it. And then there's people like, why are you here? What's your purpose here? And then it gets into possession of space and time, and they start to discuss your place of being at some other place, taxation, all this stuff. You have to pay to exist. You have to pay to play for some people, and then it questions, well, it gets pretty deep, you know what I mean? So, that's an interesting thing to just think about. Well, being in time, and what is this about? What is my purpose here? Does being in this time and space, does this affect the way I think? Do I need to be at a different setting? You often see people pay to be in a different place just to think, like a library, a different setting. And then sometimes it's just free. Like if you go to the Bureau of Land Management, all that land out there is free. You just camp out there, or spend all this money for a nice fancy house, And it's not even that. It's just also like, how many thoughts can I think in a given time, How relative is my time, So you can kind of get stuck on this type of thing, and you got to be careful with it, You can go crazy thinking about being, existing in time, Maurice Merleau-Ponty further developed phenomenology of emphasizing the embodied nature of perception, arguing that our understanding of the world is fundamentally shaped by our bodily experience. So, the world that we see is inside of us, like, you are the world, you know what I mean? Because that's how you perceive it, In essence, you are the universe, and, it's a bodily experience, life. It's not just basically, the way you perceive reality is only based on how you perceive it, you could say, this is what this is, and someone else could say, no, that's not it, So, it's kind of important to understand that. It gets pretty sophisticated. The language I'm using for it's kind of elementary, but you can get into some pretty deep conversations with this type of knowledge. Analytic philosophy emerged in the early 20th century as a reaction against idealism and metaphysical speculation of the 19th century, emphasizing clarity and logic and the analysis of language. This movement is particularly prominent in the Anglo-American philosophical tradition. So I don't know too much about analytic philosophy or even metaphysical speculation. I have studied metaphysical speculation, but emphasizing clarity and logic. So it's like this. It's like, well, you sound dumb saying that because it's not clear, it's not logical, it's a logical fallacy. You know what I mean? Well, what gives you the authority to say that? Like perception is relative. The way I understand things is different. It's like my language, how I perceive it. It's just, how can you judge me and my rationality, if our language is inherently different and the way I understand the world is inherently different? Why should I be victimized or belittled because I say it in a different way? Emphasizing clarity. What is clarity? And it's sort of like, well, when we're talking about clarity and logic and analysis of language, it's like playing a game. It's like, okay, you're playing the game with different rules. If you're going to be in my house or in my country or in my state or community or neighborhood, we talk in this manner. You know what I mean? This is how we do it. I'm going to show you how, you know? And that's sort of like where I'm getting at with it, you know? And that way you can kind of converse with people a bit better. So, you know, but it's sort of important to kind of understand the core of it, you know? And clarity and logic of it, you know. Yeah, it's relative and it has to be established in a certain setting. Anyway, Bertrand Russell and Ludwig Wittgenstein are central figures in analytic philosophy of language, laid the foundation for much of the 20th century philosophy, while Wittgenstein's later work, particularly Philosophical Investigations, challenged the idea that language serves merely to represent the world. Instead, suggests the meaning arises from the use of language in specific context. You know, so yeah, specific context. You know, like people who live in a different setting probably speaks upon things in a different context. You know, so that's just another important aspect of knowledge to kind of keep in mind. G.E. Moore is also a significant figure for his work on ethics, common sense philosophy, advocating for a return to ordinary language and clear reasoning. You know, so it can get real obscure and almost abstract when speaking about this type of stuff. But you know, in an academic setting, you know, some things need to be established when communicating philosophical ideas, you know. I mean, after all, contemporary philosophy is an ever-developing and evolving thing right now. I mean, it basically started last century, you know. All of it a little bit before World War II, basically after the Industrial Revolution, the second one, you know, as human thought has changed, you know, and it's still really important and it's very relevant in today's setting too, even with access to all this technology and stuff. I mean, it's just important to, when navigating, you know, different modes of thinking and the way we perceive, you know, our lives. You can establish some sort of transparency with other people, you know, and you can communicate the messages that you're trying to convey in a way that other people can understand, you know. And so all of these different types of philosophies is sort of like exploring these ideas that shape our emotions, our personality, our character, you know, our convictions, our belief systems, you know, our power dynamics too, you know. And it's just sort of like a way to kind of understand ourselves a bit, you know. Because a lot of people, like when you ride a bike, right, you don't know how you're riding it, you just ride it sometimes, you know. But we don't really get into the mechanics of it all, you know, because there's really no need to. But when we do, we can end up finding a better way to do it, you know. So that's sort of the point of all this, you know. Anyway, that's my take on all this, you know. And it was about 3 pages worth. And I don't know, it kind of gives me a sense of spiritual direction, you know. There's not too much theology intertwined in this, you know. And some of these people are nihilists, you know. And you know, the thing about nihilism, it's sort of is like a means to an end, you know. It sort of negates, I think, what philosophy is trying to accomplish, which is sort of finding an inherent purpose, going back to existentialism, you know. That's more of a purpose, while other forms of philosophy is sort of how we understand and experience life, you know. While existentialism is like, well, what's existing all about? You know, that's more of the purpose-driven aspect of it. Structuralist principles is kind of like, well, how does what is the structure of our understanding, right? Like English is a way that we sort of understand this realm, you know, and other languages is a different way to kind of understand a different realm, you know. It's a structure, you know, English in general, and it's a limited structure, it's a limited system, you know, and you know, like gravity and walking and seeing the sun, you know, it's all a structure, you know, and it's underlying our thought, and it influences our thoughts, our next moves, you know, and the creation of new literary works, you know, and symbols and all that stuff. Is it universal, you know, or is it different? What can we kind of think of it, you know? But existentialism is kind of the meat and potatoes of this stuff. If you're like if you're a Christian, right, you're trying to understand your purpose, or if you're atheist or something, and you want, you know, like, you know, some philosophers say, oh, you make your own purpose. Others are like, well, it really depends on the power dynamics, and others it's like, well, it's God, you know, your purpose is to serve God and honor Him and glorify Him, you know. So and that sort of ends it with there. And so all of them are sort of like eventually it has a means to an end to it. Okay, I found my purpose, it's to do that, but then, like, what's the details about it? Like, how do I proceed from there, you know? So I'll dive more into this later, but thanks for watching. You know, I'm going to try to progress in this philosophy here, and possibly other theological concepts, you know. I mean, you know, it's just sort of like spiritual epiphanies you get. If you kind of want to understand them all, philosophy is a good way of like understanding it, you know. So, or communicating it in a way for people to understand. What's your motive? You know what I mean? Or what is this spiritual reformation that you're going through? You know, it's a sort of a way to communicate to it, and communicate it with other people. You know? So, y'all take care. Thanks for watching.